The intergalactic slave market buzzed with activity under the harsh light of two glaring suns. Among the exotic beings being sold like livestock stood Eric Bannon, a human, tall and defiant despite the cruel shackles around his wrists. He had been captured from Earth, a planet ravaged by a war they had never seen coming. His fellow captives, worn and beaten, shuffled along in despair, but not Eric. His gaze burned with determination, unwilling to give in to the fate forced upon him. As he stood, resolute amidst the chaos, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. From the rear of the market, a hover platform gilded in gold floated gracefully towards the auction platform. All eyes turned to the palanquin it carried, veiled by delicate curtains. Whispers rippled through the throngs. The Queen of Zura. Eric narrowed his eyes as the palanquin stopped before him. The veils were drawn back, revealing an alien woman of ethereal beauty. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, with silver hair cascading down her shoulders like liquid starlight. Her eyes, a piercing shade of teal, scanned the market before resting on Eric. Her regal posture and commanding presence were undeniable, and her name echoed through the crowd. Zarina, Queen of Zura, ruler of a vast empire spanning solar systems. Her gaze lingered on Eric, assessing him as though he were an artifact from a distant world. With a delicate gesture, she signaled to her attendants. "I'll take this one," she declared, her voice melodic yet cold. The auctioneer, stunned for a moment, quickly recovered. "Your Majesty, are you sure?" "Humans are." "I know what I'm doing." Zarina cut him off, her voice sharp. "Bring him." Without another word, Eric was hauled onto the platform and placed before the Queen. His mind raced, but he refused to show fear. His posture remained unyielding, and his dark eyes met hers, challenging. The Queen raised a silver eyebrow in amusement. "Do you not kneel before your Queen?" she asked, her voice like silk, with a dangerous edge. Eric met her gaze. "I'll serve," he said calmly, "but I won't kneel to anyone." For a tense moment, the two locked eyes, and then, to his surprise, Zarina smiled. A slow, calculating smile. She waved her hand, and Eric's restraints fell to the ground. "You have spirit," she said. "Perhaps you'll prove more useful than the others." Without another word, Zarina's guards pulled him onto the platform, and the crowd parted to let them pass. As the palanquin carried them away from the market and toward the towering citadel of Zura's capital, Eric glanced back at the bustling market below. He was still a slave, but something had shifted. The dangerous game was beginning, and he intended to play it well. The halls of Zarina's palace were a marvel of alien design, walls of polished obsidian, glowing softly with lines of energy, and ceilings that stretched high above, sparkling with star-like lights. Eric was led through these corridors, closely guarded by silent warriors clad in shimmering armor. Zarina walked ahead, her gown of flowing silver fabric whispering across the floor. She did not look back at him, but Eric could feel her presence, cold and calculating. He was taken to a vast chamber where the Queen seated herself on a floating throne, her eyes gleaming with interest as she regarded him. "Do you know why I bought you, human?" Zarina asked, her voice soft but demanding attention. "I assume it wasn't for my company," Eric replied dryly, keeping his tone respectful but firm. He had learned long ago not to bend too easily, no matter how dire the circumstances. The Queen's lips twitched in amusement. "I bought you because you're different. The others, they break too easily. But you stand tall even in chains. Tell me, what drives you?" Eric considered his words carefully. "Survival," he said at last. "I won't die on my knees. Not for you, not for anyone." Zarina leaned back, her eyes narrowing slightly. Bold words for a man who was just sold like cattle. "But I admire your defiance. There's strength in it." She rose from her throne, walking slowly toward him. "Here, in my empire, strength is everything. But you'll need more than that to survive. You'll serve me, and in return, I will teach you the ways of this world. If you succeed, perhaps I'll grant you something more than just your life." Eric's jaw tightened. "And if I fail?" Zarina stopped before him, her eyes cold as the depths of space. "Then you'll learn why my enemies fear me." For the next few days, Eric was trained relentlessly. He learned about the customs and politics of Zura, the complex hierarchy that governed the vast empire. Zarina kept a close watch on him, her curiosity piqued by his resistance to submission. But it was more than just survival now. There was something about Zarina, something deeper than her cold exterior, that intrigued him, and he could sense that the feeling was mutual. Every time their eyes met, the air between them seemed to hum with tension, a mixture of challenge and something unspoken. One morning, as Eric was sparring with one of Zarina's elite guards in the training grounds, he noticed the queen watching from a distance. Her gaze followed his every move, and for a moment, he felt as if she were weighing him on a scale, trying to determine his true worth. The guard lunged at him, but Eric, having honed his skills in the brutal world of Earth's underground resistance, parried and countered with swift precision. The clash of their blades echoed through the courtyard, drawing the attention of more warriors. The sparring match ended with Eric disarming the guard, panting but victorious. Zarina stepped forward, her eyes alight with something unfamiliar. "You fight well," she said, her voice almost admiring. Eric wiped the sweat from his brow, not daring to show how much her words meant to him. "I fight to survive." Zarina's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Perhaps there is more to you than just survival." Zarina's words hung in the air, their weight sinking into Eric's mind. He met her eyes, searching for the meaning behind them. There was a flicker of something, an emotion buried deep beneath the cold, calculating exterior. But just as quickly, it vanished, and the queen's regal mask slipped back into place. "Rest now," Zarina said, turning away. "Tomorrow, your real test begins." Eric didn't respond. His heart raced, not just from the fight, but from the unspoken connection that lingered between them. What exactly was this test she had in mind? Was it another battle, or something far more dangerous? That night, in the dimly lit quarters he had been given, Eric sat in silence, his thoughts a storm of uncertainty. He had been trained for weeks now, pushed to his limits physically and mentally, but Zarina's true intentions remained a mystery. Why had she chosen him? What did she really want? The next morning, the answer came. He was led to a grand arena, a massive circular structure with high walls made of black stone, humming with the energy of alien technology. Thousands of Zurans filled the stands, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Zarina sat on a raised platform, her throne floating above the crowd, exuding power and command. In the center of the arena stood a hulking creature unlike anything Eric had ever seen. It was a beast of towering size, with gleaming red eyes and scales that shimmered in the harsh light. Its claws scraped the ground as it snarled, pacing back and forth. Zarina's voice echoed across the arena. "This is your test, human. Defeat the Grozeth, and you will have earned your place in my court. Fail, and it will be the last thing you ever do." The crowd roared with excitement, but Eric stood frozen for a moment, his eyes locked on the monstrous creature. It was a challenge beyond anything he had faced before, but he couldn't afford to back down, not now. A sword was thrust into his hand, and he was pushed toward the center of the arena. The Grozeth turned its massive head toward him, its nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. With a deafening roar, it charged. Eric's instincts kicked in. He dodged to the side just as the creature's massive claws swiped at the ground where he had been standing. The force of the impact shook the arena, sending tremors through the stone beneath his feet. The crowd's cheers blended into a dull roar in his ears as he focused on the beast. Every move was calculated, every step a dance of survival. He slashed at the Grozeth's legs, dodging another swipe of its claws. The blade cut deep, and the creature howled in pain, but it was far from finished. Zarina watched from her throne, her eyes following every motion. There was no mercy in her gaze, only the cold expectation of a ruler who demanded results. The battle raged on, and Eric felt his strength waning. The Grozeth was relentless, and even with his training, Eric knew he was at his limit. But something deeper pushed him forward, something beyond survival. It was defiance, a refusal to be broken, a determination to win not just for himself, but to prove that even in the face of overwhelming odds, he would not kneel. With a final burst of energy, Eric dodged another powerful swing and leaped onto the creature's back. The crowd gasped as he drove his sword deep into the beast's neck, twisting the blade with all his might. The Grozeth let out one last, blood-curdling roar before collapsing to the ground in a heap, lifeless. Silence fell over the arena. Eric, panting and bloodied, stood over the fallen creature, his chest heaving. He turned his gaze towards Zarina, waiting for her judgment. Her expression was unreadable, but something had shifted in her eyes. She rose from her throne, her voice cutting through the stillness. "You have proven your strength, Eric Bannon." The crowd erupted into cheers, but Eric didn't care. His eyes remained locked on Zarina. There was something between them now, something neither of them could deny. He had passed her test, but he knew this was only the beginning. Zarina's gaze softened, just slightly, as she spoke her next words. "Welcome to my court." And with that, Eric knew his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The Queen had chosen him, but whether as a pawn, an ally, or something more, only time would tell. Eric's victory over the Grozeth marked the beginning of his new life within Zarina's court, but it didn't bring the peace he might have hoped for. If anything, it painted a larger target on his back. As soon as he was introduced as part of the Queen's inner circle, the whispers started, jealous murmurs from noble houses, curious glances from her advisors, and hidden disdain from the court's elite. The court of Zuro was not just a place of power, it was a nest of intrigue, where alliances shifted like sand beneath his feet. The Queen, however, remained unreadable. Zarina neither praised him nor distanced herself. Instead, she maintained a cold professionalism, offering him a place at her side, but never revealing why she had chosen him in the first place. That night, Eric found himself standing in his quarters, staring out at the darkened skyline of Zuro's capital. The towering spires glowed with a faint energy, and the city below hummed with life. He was no longer a slave, but neither was he free. His fate now seemed tied to Zarina in ways he didn't fully understand. The door to his chamber slid open with a soft hiss, breaking his reverie. One of Zarina's attendants, a tall, slender woman with silver skin and mechanical implants on her face, entered. "The Queen summons you," she said without preamble. Her eyes, like so many others in the court, regarded him with cold indifference. Eric nodded and followed her through the palace halls, their footsteps echoing in the quiet. It was late, and the usually bustling corridors were empty. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath. He was led to a secluded chamber, different from the throne room or the court where they usually met. This room was dimly lit, with the faint glow of starlight streaming through a large window that framed the vastness of space. Zarina stood there, her back to him, silhouetted against the stars. "Eric," she said, her voice softer than usual, almost reflective. "You wanted to see me, Your Majesty." Eric replied, standing at attention. She turned to face him, her teal eyes gleaming in the low light. For the first time, there was no one else around, no guards or advisors, just the two of them. "I did," she said, stepping closer, her gaze steady. "Your strength in the arena proved your worth, but here in my court, strength is not enough." Eric tensed, unsure of what she meant. "What do you need from me then?" "Loyalty," Zarina said simply, her eyes narrowing slightly. "This world, this empire, it thrives on loyalty. Power here is not just held by the sword but by those who can control the shadows, those who can maneuver through the web of politics and alliances without losing their soul. Eric studied her, trying to discern her meaning. And you think I can navigate these shadows? Zarina's lips curved into a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Perhaps. But loyalty, that is something I cannot demand. It must be earned. A moment of silence passed between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Why me? Eric finally asked, unable to keep the curiosity from his voice. Why did you bring me here, out of all the others? You could have chosen anyone. Zarina's smile faded, and for the first time, she looked almost vulnerable. She turned back toward the window, gazing out into the vastness of space. Because I saw something in you, she said quietly. Something I have not seen in a long time. A fire that refuses to be extinguished. This court is filled with sycophants and power-hungry nobles who would kill to be in your place. But you stood before me and refused to kneel. That kind of defiance is rare. Her words caught him off guard. He had expected a tactical explanation, something about his skills or his usefulness. But this was something deeper. Defiance is a dangerous trait for a ruler to admire, Eric said carefully. It can turn on you. Zarina turned back to him, her gaze piercing. Perhaps, but it can also be harnessed. I need someone at my side who is not afraid to challenge me, someone who can see beyond the layers of power and ambition. And that is why you are here, Eric Bannon. Her words sent a shiver down his spine. There was something intoxicating about the way she spoke, about the connection that was slowly forming between them. But beneath that, he could sense the danger. Zarina was playing a game where the stakes were far higher than he had realized. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice steady. Zarina stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. There are forces in this court that would see me fall. Enemies I cannot face directly. I need someone who can move in the shadows, someone who can uncover their plans without raising suspicion. Eric felt a weight settle on his shoulders. This was not the role of a soldier or a bodyguard. This was something far more intricate. You want me to be your spy. Call it what you will, Zarina said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But know this, if you succeed, I will reward you beyond your wildest dreams. Fail, and your life will be forfeit. Eric nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had fought for survival before, but this was different. This was a game of trust, manipulation, and cunning. A game where one wrong move could end in death. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice firm. Zarina's eyes flickered with something like approval, but there was still that cold edge, the reminder that in her world, no one was truly safe. Good, she said, stepping back. Your first target will be revealed tomorrow. Rest now, for tomorrow, you enter the Court of Shadows. As Eric left the chamber, his mind was racing. The battlefield had changed, but the stakes were the same. He would survive, not just because of his strength, but because he had no other choice. But beneath the tension, a deeper question gnawed at him. Could he really trust Zarina? And more importantly, could she trust him? In the Court of Shadows, trust was a weapon as sharp as any blade. The following morning, the palace was alive with its usual bustle of servants, guards, and courtiers. But today, Eric's path was different. No longer a passive observer, he was now tasked with uncovering hidden dangers lurking within Zarina's court. He had been summoned by one of the queen's advisors, a gaunt, sharp-eyed man named Arthur, who seemed to know every dark secret that kept the empire running. You've been given a rare opportunity, human, Arthur said as they walked through the winding corridors of the palace. His voice was smooth but carried an undertone of menace. The queen does not hand out her trust lightly, and yet she has chosen you to work within her inner circle. I'm well aware of the stakes, Eric replied, his voice cool. What do you need me to do? Arthur's lips curled into a thin smile. You'll learn soon enough. But first, we need to see how well you can move among the shadows. They arrived at a small chamber deep within the heart of the palace, its entrance guarded by 2 soldiers in obsidian armor. Althar waved them aside, and the doors slid open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with walls covered in strange alien glyphs and a large central table displaying a holographic map of the palace and surrounding city. Althar gestured toward the map. "This is Zura's capital, as you know, but what you may not realize is that beneath its shining surface lies a network of intrigue. Factions vie for power, and enemies of the crown are always plotting. You are to infiltrate one such faction." He tapped a part of the map, highlighting a section of the city marked by narrow streets and dark alleys. The Silent Hand, an underground organization that's been growing in influence. We suspect they've been orchestrating several recent attempts on the Queen's life, though they have so far evaded capture. Eric frowned. "You want me to go undercover?" Althar nodded, his expression serious. "Yes. You'll pose as a mercenary looking to make a name for himself. Your combat skills will get you noticed, but it's your ability to gather information that will prove valuable. The Queen needs to know who's behind these attacks, and how far their reach extends." Eric studied the map, memorizing the key locations Althar pointed out. "And how do I know who to trust?" Althar's smile returned, cold and thin. "You don't. Trust no one, and assume everyone is an enemy, including those who claim to be your allies." The words sent a chill through Eric, but he knew they were the truth. The Court of Shadows was no place for hesitation or misplaced loyalty. He would have to rely on his instincts and the skills he had honed during his years of resistance fighting on Earth. "Your first contact will be tonight," Althar continued, handing Eric a small datapad. "A man named Drax. He runs a cantina in the lower district, where members of the Silent Hand are known to gather. He can introduce you to the right people, but be careful. Drax is a slippery one." Eric took the datapad, his mind already working through the plan. This was a dangerous game he was stepping into, but it wasn't his first. He had survived Earth's fall, and he had survived the brutal battles on Zura. This was just another fight. Only this time, it wasn't with fists and weapons, but with words and deception. "I'll get it done," Eric said, meeting Althar's gaze. Althar nodded approvingly. "Good. The Queen is counting on you. Don't fail her." With that, Althar turned and left, leaving Eric alone with the map and his thoughts. He stared at the holographic image of the city, knowing that somewhere within those dark streets, enemies were plotting, and he would have to find them before they found him. Later that night, Eric made his way to the lower district of the city. The air was thick with the smell of burning fuel and the hum of alien machinery, a stark contrast to the polished grandeur of the palace. The streets were narrow and winding, lit by flickering neon signs in alien scripts. It was a place where the law held little power, and the only rule was survival. The cantina, where Drax was said to operate, was a dim, smoke-filled establishment tucked into one of the district's many side streets. As Eric stepped inside, he scanned the room, noting the mix of patrons, smugglers, mercenaries, and shadowy figures who moved with the practiced grace of killers. At the far end of the room, a large man with reptilian features sat behind the bar, his yellow eyes gleaming in the low light. This had to be Drax. Eric approached the bar, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. "I'm looking for work," he said simply. Drax glanced at him, his gaze assessing. "And what makes you think I have any to offer?" "I've heard you have connections," Eric replied, leaning in slightly. "Connections that could use someone with my skills." Drax snorted, his reptilian tongue flicking out briefly. "And what skills would those be?" "Fighting. Surviving," Eric said, his voice low but firm. "I don't ask questions, and I don't care who's paying, as long as the pay is good." For a moment, Drax said nothing, his eyes boring into Eric's. Then he grunted and gestured to one of the patrons sitting in the corner, a scared man who looked like he had seen his share of battles. Talk to him, Drax said. If he likes you, maybe we'll see if you're worth keeping around. Eric nodded and made his way to the corner table, his heart pounding but his face betraying nothing. This was it, the first step into the shadows. If he played this right, he could gain the trust of the Silent Hand. But one wrong move, and he'd be dead before he could report back to Zarina. As he sat down across from the scared man, their eyes locked. The tension in the air was palpable. So, the man growled, "You think you're tough enough to run with us?" Eric leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I don't think. I know." The man grinned, showing sharp teeth. "We'll see about that." And with that, the game began. The scared man's grin faded into a harsh sneer as he signaled to a few others scattered around the cantina. Eric noticed their movements, subtle but coordinated. These were no ordinary thugs. Members of the Silent Hand, most likely. His first test had arrived sooner than expected. "I'm called Rook," the scared man said, his voice gravelly. "You want to run with us, you'll have to prove you're not all talk. There's a job tonight. A simple one. Mess it up, and we'll leave your body for the scavengers." Eric met Rook's gaze, unflinching. "What's the job?" "Shipment comes in at midnight," Rook explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Weapons and supplies from an off-world dealer. We need to intercept it before it reaches the palace guard. You'll go with our crew to handle the pickup." Eric's mind raced. This was more than just a test of loyalty. Weapons shipments meant trouble Zarina would want to know about. But he couldn't appear too eager, not yet. Sounds straightforward enough. "Who's running the deal?" Rook's eyes narrowed. "You ask too many questions for a newcomer." "I need to know what I'm walking into," Eric countered smoothly. "Can't do the job right if I'm blind." Rook seemed to weigh his answer before finally nodding. "Fair enough. The supplier's an old friend of ours. His name's Kelos, a trader with ties to the outer systems. Don't worry about him. Just make sure the delivery gets where it needs to go." Eric nodded, keeping his expression neutral. He had heard of Kelos, one of the galaxy's most notorious black market dealers. If the Silent Hand was working with him, this was bigger than just a simple arms deal. The stakes were rising, and Zarina needed this information. "When do we leave?" Eric asked. Rook stood, signaling the others. "Now, gear up, and don't get in our way." The Silent Hand's base of operations was hidden beneath the cantina, accessed through a series of narrow tunnels carved into the planet's crust. The deeper Eric descended, the more the air felt heavy with the weight of secrecy and danger. The group gathered in a dimly lit chamber, where crates of weapons were stacked against the walls, guarded by heavily armed sentries. Rook tossed Eric a small bag. "Here, you'll need this." Inside the bag was a sleek blaster, custom-made with alien tech that Eric hadn't seen before. He strapped it to his side and followed Rook and the others out through another tunnel that led to the surface. The city was quieter at this hour, the lower district's usual chaos replaced by an eerie calm. Shadows flickered under the dim glow of streetlights, and the hum of passing hovercrafts echoed through the empty streets. Eric kept pace with the group, his senses on high alert. They arrived at the rendezvous point, deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. A large transport ship hovered nearby, its engines idling as workers unloaded crates onto the platform. Kelos, the dealer, stood at the center, flanked by two massive bodyguards. Rook gestured for Eric to hang back as he approached Kelos, exchanging a few quiet words with the dealer. Eric scanned the area, his eyes darting between the transport and the guards. Something didn't feel right. There were too many unknowns, and the Silent Hand wasn't the only dangerous element in play here. As the crates were being loaded into a waiting transport, Eric spotted movement in the shadows, a flicker of motion too deliberate to be a passing civilian. He tensed, his hand hovering over his blaster. His instincts were screaming at him to stay sharp. And then it happened. A series of explosions tore through the air, bright flashes of light followed by deafening booms. The transport ship lurched as flames erupted from its engines, and chaos descended on the warehouse. Ambush. Rook roared, drawing his weapon as masked figures emerged from the surrounding alleys, firing into the group. Eric dove for cover, pulling his blaster free and returning fire. The air filled with the sound of laser blasts and shouting as the Silent Hand scrambled to defend themselves. Eric's mind raced. This was no ordinary raid. Someone had set them up. But who? And why? Through the smoke and fire, he saw Kelos retreating toward the transport, his bodyguards cutting down anyone who got in their way. Rook and his crew were pinned down, outnumbered and outgunned. They wouldn't last long if the attackers kept pressing the advantage. Eric moved with precision, taking down two of the ambushers with well-placed shots before making his way toward the transport. He needed to get close to Kelos. He needed answers. But as he closed the distance, a sudden blast sent him sprawling, his vision spinning as he hit the ground hard. Through the haze he saw a figure standing over him, a masked assailant, blaster aimed at his chest. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Eric's heart pounded in his ears, and he could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had survived worse, but this felt different. He was so close to uncovering the truth, but now, one wrong move could end everything. And then, just as the attacker squeezed the trigger, a flash of silver caught the corner of Eric's eye. A blade, sharp and deadly, slashed across the attacker's chest, sending him crumpling to the ground in a heap. Eric blinked in disbelief as the figure who had saved him stepped into the light. It was Zarina. Clad in sleek combat armor, her face calm but fierce, the Queen moved with lethal precision, cutting down the remaining attackers with swift, deadly strikes. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun, the ambushers fleeing into the night, leaving their dead behind. Eric struggled to his feet, his body aching from the blast. Zarina stood before him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you to come yourself," Eric said, his voice hoarse. Zarina's eyes were hard as steel. This was more than a simple deal gone wrong. Someone is playing a dangerous game, and they made the mistake of underestimating me. Eric nodded, wiping blood from his forehead. Whoever they are, they knew exactly where to strike. This was a setup. "I know," Zarina replied, her gaze shifting toward the wreckage of the transport. "Which means we're dealing with someone inside my own court. Someone who knows our every move." Eric felt a chill run down his spine. The Queen was right. The enemy was closer than they had realized. And now, it was clear that the game they were playing was far more deadly than he had imagined. Zarina sheathed her blade, her expression softening just slightly as she looked at him. "You did well tonight, Eric, but this is only the beginning. If we are to survive, we'll need to uncover the traitor before they strike again." Eric met her gaze, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. He had come here to serve, to survive, but now, he was part of something much larger. A conspiracy that threatened not just his life, but the very future of the Empire. "I'm with you," he said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. Zarina nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Good, because we're going to need all the strength we can get." And with that, they disappeared into the night, the shadows of the city closing in around them as they prepared for the next move in the deadly game of survival and betrayal. The night was suffocating, thick with tension as Eric and Zarina made their way through the labyrinthine streets of Zura's capital. The flickering lights from the distant citadel cast long, ominous shadows on the narrow alleyways they traversed. Each step seemed to echo the growing uncertainty that loomed over them. Eric, still reeling from the ambush, kept his eyes sharp, scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Zarina moved silently beside him, her mind clearly working through the possibilities. She had always been one step ahead of her enemies, but tonight's ambush had rattled her more than she cared to admit. There was a traitor in her court, someone who knew too much about her plans. And that meant whoever was behind this was closer than either of them had thought. Where to now? Eric asked, his voice low but steady. Zarina didn't answer immediately. Her teal eyes gleamed in the dark as she considered their next move. We return to the Citadel. We need answers, and I know exactly where to get them. Eric nodded, trusting her instinct. But even as they moved toward the heart of the Empire, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The Citadel of Zura stood as a monolithic symbol of the Queen's power, its towering spires reaching into the night sky. The glowing energy lines that pulsed along its dark surface gave the structure an otherworldly appearance, as though it were alive with the heartbeat of the Empire itself. Zarina led Eric through a hidden entrance, bypassing the usual throng of guards and courtiers. The corridors they walked now were cold and silent, a stark contrast to the lavish palace above. This was where the Queen conducted her more delicate affairs. They arrived at a secure chamber deep within the Citadel. As the doors slid open, Eric was greeted by a sight he hadn't expected. A sleek, high-tech interrogation room, lined with monitors and devices he didn't recognize. At the center of the room stood a man bound to a chair, his face bruised and bloody from a recent encounter with the Queen's enforcers. Zarina stepped forward, her expression hardening as she approached the prisoner. "Varen," she said coldly, "it seems your luck has run out." The man looked up, his dark eyes filled with defiance, but there was fear behind them. He was clearly a man who had been broken before, though perhaps not completely. "Your Majesty," he sneered, his voice strained. "I have nothing to say." Zarina's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "Oh, but you will. You see, I know you've been working with the Silent Hand. I know you're the one who tipped them off about the shipment. What I want to know now is, who are you working for?" Varen remained silent, his jaw clenched, but Eric could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. This man wasn't a leader. He was a pawn, someone easily manipulated by those with more power. Eric had seen it countless times during the resistance on Earth. Zarina tilted her head, studying Varen like a predator sizing up her prey. "You seem to misunderstand your position," she said softly, her voice taking on a menacing edge. "You've betrayed me, Varen, and I don't take betrayal lightly." With a flick of her wrist, the room's holographic display activated, casting a sickly green light over the prisoner. Images of the ambush at the warehouse flashed across the screens. Eric, Rook, Kelos, all captured in excruciating detail. Varen's eyes widened at the sight. "You see," Zarina continued, "I have eyes everywhere. So I'll ask again, who is behind this?" Eric watched as Varen's resolve began to crack. He knew that look, the look of a man cornered, knowing his time was running out. I don't know who they are." Varen spat, panic seeping into his voice. "I was just following orders. They contacted me through an encrypted channel. All I know is that they want to destabilize the Empire. They promised me power." "Listen, the new order." Zarina's expression remained impassive, but Eric could sense the tension beneath her calm exterior. A shadowy force working to destabilize the Empire was worse than they had feared. This wasn't just about weapons deals or sabotage. This was a calculated move to overthrow Zarina's rule. "And what about Kelos?" Eric interjected, stepping forward. "Was he part of the plan?" Varen shook his head frantically. "No, Kelos is just a smuggler. A middleman. He didn't know what was coming. They used him to get the weapons, but he's not important to them. The real threat is deeper." Zarina exchanged a glance with Eric. They were dealing with a far-reaching conspiracy, one that went beyond a mere arms deal. Someone powerful, someone close to the throne, was pulling the strings. Zarina leaned in close to Varen, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm going to give you one chance to redeem yourself. Varen, tell me how to find them." The prisoner swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. There's a meeting. Tomorrow night, in the Undercity. They'll be there. All the players, the ones who control the silent hand. If you go, you'll find out everything. Zarina straightened, her cold gaze lingering on Veron. If you're lying, you'll wish for a quick death. With that, she turned to Eric, signaling that their interrogation was over. As they left the chamber, the weight of the revelation hung between them. Eric could feel the tension in Zarina's stride, her mind already calculating the next steps. The conspiracy ran deeper than they had imagined, and the traitor, whoever they were, was still out there, watching, waiting. You think Veron's telling the truth? Eric asked as they walked through the Citadel's dimly lit corridors. Zarina's expression was unreadable. We'll find out tomorrow night. If he is, we'll have the names of the conspirators. If not, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Eric's mind was already racing. The Undercity was a dangerous place, a warren of crime and corruption where power shifted with the rise and fall of criminal syndicates. A meeting of all the key players in the conspiracy. That was the kind of opportunity they couldn't afford to miss. Tomorrow, we end this, Zarina said, her voice steely with determination. Once we know who's behind this, we'll root them out. No one betrays the Queen of Zura and lies. Eric nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow night's mission would be their most dangerous yet. The game they had entered was one of life and death, and the enemy was playing for keeps. As they ascended to the upper levels of the Citadel, the stars outside the vast windows glittered coldly in the night sky, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the forces moving against them. But Eric was no longer just a survivor. He was part of something bigger now, and he was ready to fight for it. The following night, the Undercity was alive with a different kind of pulse. It was darker here, the air thick with the scent of oil and decay, but there was something more. A current of danger that buzzed just beneath the surface. Shadows slithered across crumbling walls as Eric and Zarina moved silently through the narrow streets. The din of distant voices echoed in the distance, but the immediate surroundings were eerily quiet. Zarina had chosen a small, tactical team for this mission. Rook was among them, along with 2 elite operatives from Zarina's personal guard, silent figures, deadly and efficient. As they reached the designated meeting point, a dilapidated warehouse hidden deep in the heart of the Undercity, Zarina gave a sharp nod, signaling them to halt. From the shadows, a familiar voice hissed, "You came." Eric's eyes locked on Veron, standing in the shadows, looking more worn and nervous than the last time they had seen him. His eyes flicked nervously between Zarina and the others, but when he saw Eric, something close to desperation flashed across his face. "I did what you asked," Veron muttered, barely able to meet Zarina's cold gaze. "The meeting's happening. They're inside." Zarina remained expressionless, her face betraying nothing. "You've done well, Veron," she said softly, though there was no warmth in her tone. "Stay here." Veron flinched as if expecting more, but he nodded and melted into the shadows. Eric watched him carefully, still not fully trusting the man. But there were bigger issues to address now. The warehouse loomed ahead, a decrepit relic of the city's past, its exterior crumbling under the weight of years. But inside, Eric knew, would be something very different. A carefully guarded meeting of powerful figures who controlled the silent hand, those intent on bringing down Zarina's empire from within. Zarina turned to Eric, her expression hard. "We move fast, strike hard. No one leaves until we have answers." Her words were steel, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper in her tone. This was personal. Eric nodded, gripping his weapon tightly as they advanced. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Around a long, dimly lit table sat several shadowed figures, alien warlords, smugglers, and crime lords from across the galaxy. At the head of the table was a hooded figure, their face obscured but their presence commanding. Eric and Zarina moved silently into the shadows along the perimeter of the room, positioning themselves for a strike. He could feel the cold anticipation in Zarina as she prepared to confront the conspirators, the people who had been undermining her rule. The hooded figure spoke, their voice a low, resonant growl. "Everything is in place. The Queen's forces are fractured, her attention divided. Soon, Zura will fall." Eric's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. They had to move now before the conspirators could scatter. He glanced at Zarina, and with a nod from her, he signaled the team to move in. Zarina stepped forward from the shadows, her voice cutting through the dim light like a blade. "I wouldn't be so sure of that." The room froze. The hooded figure stood slowly, and the others around the table reached for weapons. But before anyone could react, Zarina's team had them surrounded, their weapons drawn and ready. The hooded figure turned towards Zarina, pulling back their hood to reveal a face that sent a jolt of shock through Eric. A face they recognized. It was Teres, one of Zarina's closest advisors, someone who had been by her side for years. Eric's mind raced, trying to process the betrayal. This was the traitor, the mastermind behind the silent hand. "You," Zarina hissed, her voice cold with fury. Teres smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Did you really think I would allow you to continue ruling unchecked, Zarina? Your reign has lasted long enough. It's time for change." Zarina's eyes narrowed, her anger palpable. "You'll regret this." Before Teres could respond, chaos erupted. The conspirators moved, attempting to fight their way out, but Zarina's team was fast, dispatching them with brutal efficiency. Eric found himself in the middle of the fray, his instincts kicking in as he fought off attackers with precision and strength. But his focus was on Teres, who had drawn a concealed weapon and was moving towards Zarina, intent on ending her reign here and now. Eric surged forward, blocking the path and engaging Teres in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. "You don't deserve her empire," Teres snarled as they fought, his strikes vicious and calculated. "I don't care about the empire," Eric grunted, parrying a blow and landing a solid punch to Teres' side. "But I won't let you destroy her." Their fight was fierce, but Eric's training and determination gave him the edge. With a final, decisive move, he disarmed Teres and sent him crashing to the ground. Panting, Eric stood over him, his weapon trained on the traitor. Zarina approached, her face a mask of controlled rage. She looked down at Teres, her once trusted advisor, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Sadness. Regret. "Why?" she demanded, her voice icy. "Why betray me after all these years?" Teres laughed weakly, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Because power belongs to the strong, and you've grown weak, Zarina. You've let sentiment cloud your judgment. I was doing what needed to be done." Zarina's expression hardened. "You've failed." With a swift motion, she signaled her guards to take Teres away. As they dragged him from the room, Zarina stood still, staring after him. Eric could see the conflict in her eyes. The betrayal had cut deeper than she would ever admit. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Are you all right?" Zarina looked at him, her eyes softening for just a moment. "I will be." The conspirators had been defeated, the threat to her empire contained. But Eric knew that this battle had left scars. Zarina's rule would continue, but it had come at a cost. As they left the warehouse behind, the stars once again visible in the distance, Eric walked beside Zarina, both of them silent but resolute. The road ahead would not be easy, but they had survived this trial together. And now, more than ever, Eric knew where his loyalty lay, not just with the Empire, but with the Queen who had defied the odds and emerged stronger. In the end, Zarina had gained more than just an ally. She had gained a partner.